By the summer of 1944, the German Wehrmacht was a wounded beast, but it was still one of the most professional and lethal military organizations on Earth. Having spent years fighting a war of absolute annihilation on the Eastern Front against the Soviet Union, German soldiers considered themselves the undisputed masters of tactical warfare. When the Western Allies launched Operation Overlord and stormed the beaches of Normandy, German officers did not just see a single Allied army. They saw two distinctly different nations, each operating with entirely separate doctrines, cultural identities, and methods of waging war. To the north, around the bloody, dust-choked crossroads of Caen, the Germans faced the British Army. These were the old adversaries. The Wehrmacht had been fighting the British Tommy since 1939. From the disaster at Dunkirk, across the scorching deserts of North Africa, and up the rugged spine of Italy, the Germans knew the British. They understood their rhythms, respected their discipline, and knew exactly what to expect when a British whistle blew in the mud. To the south, near the hedgerows of Saint-Lô and the breakout at Avranches, the Germans collided with the United States Army. The Amos, as the Germans called them, were a highly scrutinized wildcard. Early in the war, during the Battle of Kasserine Pass in 1943, German commanders had easily brushed aside the green, inexperienced American troops, labeling them as soft, undisciplined, and over-reliant on luxury rations and motorized comfort. But as the battle for Europe intensified, the initial stereotypes held by the German High Command began to fracture. As hundreds of thousands of German prisoners were rounded up and interrogated by Allied intelligence, a fascinating, deeply nuanced picture emerged. When asked who they feared fighting more, the British or the Americans, the German soldiers provided an answer that revealed the terrifying reality of fighting an industrial superpower. To understand the German perspective on the British soldier, one must understand the concept of military respect versus military fear. The Wehrmacht held an immense generational respect for the British infantrymen. German tactical manuals and veteran diaries repeatedly emphasize a single trait when describing the British Tommy: stubbornness. German soldiers quickly learned that if you drove a British unit out of a defensive position, they would not panic, and they would not scatter. They would retreat to the next designated line, dig in with mechanical efficiency, and prepare a counterattack. In defensive warfare, the British were considered equal to any force on Earth. Their infantry discipline was legendary, and their elite formations, such as the paratroopers of the 1st Airborne Division or the veteran Desert Rats, were viewed by the Germans as highly dangerous, professional killers. Furthermore, the Germans deeply respected British artillery. The Royal Artillery operated with a methodical mathematical precision that could turn a German assembly area into a cratered wasteland within minutes. However, that very same professionalism gave rise to a fatal flaw that diminished German fear: predictability. German officers universally noted that British commanders were rigidly bound by their handbooks and timetables. A British attack was almost always preceded by a lengthy, highly visible artillery barrage. They rarely attacked at night unless it was heavily planned, and they seldom took spontaneous tactical risks. If a British advance encountered an unexpected German machine gun nest, the entire column would often halt, call for artillery support, and wait hours for the obstacle to be systematically cleared. To the German soldier, fighting the British was a chess match. It was brutal, it was bloody, but it was logical. You knew the moves they were going to make before they made them. And in war, predictability is a luxury for the defender. If the British were a predictable, methodical hammer, the American army was a chaotic, unpredictable storm. Following their easy victories in North Africa, the German Wehrmacht entered Normandy with a dangerous level of contempt for American fighting capability. German propaganda painted the American GI as a civilian in a uniform, a man who cared more about ice cream machinery and Coca-Cola than military honor. That contempt evaporated within the first 2 weeks of the Normandy campaign. What the Germans did not expect from the Americans was their astonishing tactical adaptability and individual initiative. In the dense, claustrophobic labyrinth of the Normandy hedgerows, the bocage, the conventional Western manuals were useless. When American officers were killed by hidden German snipers, the Germans expected the American squads to surrender or retreat. Instead, 19-year-old sergeants and privates would automatically assume command, rewrite the tactical plan on the fly, and launch aggressive, flanking assaults with a reckless, individualistic fury that stunned the Wehrmacht defenders. The Germans discovered that the American soldier possessed an aggressive, forward-leaning mentality. While the British would halt and consolidate their gains, the Americans would keep pushing, exploiting every gap in the German line with terrifying speed. But it was not just the American spirit that struck fear into the hearts of the German soldier. It was the terrifying, bottomless wealth of the American war machine. The ultimate source of German fear regarding the Americans can be summed up in a single German word: Materialschlacht, the war of material. A famous quote circulated among German veterans on the Western Front, capturing the grim reality of the tactical disparity. When the British shoot, the Germans duck. When the Germans shoot, the British duck. But when the Americans shoot, everybody ducks. The Americans did not just fight the Wehrmacht. They buried them under an avalanche of steel, high explosives, and aviation fuel. German soldiers, accustomed to rationing their ammunition and fuel, looked on in absolute horror at the limitless logistics of the United States military. Nothing symbolized this terror more than American artillery. While the British were precise and methodical, the Americans utilized a system known as time on target. This was a terrifying logistical feat where multiple artillery batteries, located miles apart, would calculate their fire so that hundreds of shells would detonate on a single German position at the exact same microsecond. There was no warning click, no time to dive into a foxhole. 1 second, there was silence. The next second, an entire German battalion was erased from existence. Compounding this ground terror was the total, suffocating domain of the Allied air forces, driven largely by the massive production lines of the United States. German soldiers dreaded the Jabus, the Jag bombers, or fighter bombers. The sky belonged to American P-47 Thunderbolts and P-51 Mustangs. Any German movement during daylight hours, whether it was a Tiger tank, a horse-drawn supply wagon, or a single motorcycle, was instantly spotted and blown to pieces from the air. The American soldier did not need to be a better marksman than the German soldier. If an American rifleman encountered a single German sniper in a house, he did not launch an infantry assault. He simply picked up a radio, and 10 minutes later, an entire squadron of fighter bombers or a battery of 155mm howitzers would level the entire block. This structural, relentless abuse of firepower inflicted a level of psychological trauma on the Wehrmacht that the British simply could not replicate. When Allied intelligence officers compiled the secret interrogation reports of high-ranking German generals captured at the end of the war, the consensus was clear and definitive. Generals like Gerd von Rundstedt and Erwin Rommel openly stated that while the British were highly respected for their defensive tenacity and professional infantry tradition, the Americans were the ones they feared most in an offensive operation. The Germans feared the Americans because the American army was an unstoppable modern entity that could not be exhausted. If the Germans destroyed 10 American tanks, 20 more would roll out of the woods to take their place. If they wiped out an American platoon, the Americans would simply rain 10,000 shells onto the coordinates and keep moving. The Americans combined this infinite material wealth with a chaotic, unpredictable aggressiveness that broke the traditional rules of European warfare. They moved too fast, they fired too much, and they refused to play by the methodical rules that the Wehrmacht had grown accustomed to when fighting the British. Ultimately, the question of whether German soldiers feared the Americans or the British more carries a dark, ironic caveat. While the Germans feared the tactical and industrial power of the Americans far more than the methodical approach of the British, there was one thing they feared more than both combined: the Eastern. To a German soldier in 1944 and 1945, the Western Allies, both British and American, represented a civilized enemy. If you surrendered to an American or a Briton, you were guaranteed a warm blanket, medical treatment, and a very high probability of surviving the war. If you were captured by the Soviet Red Army on the Eastern Front, your destination was a Siberian gulag or a shallow grave in the snow. Therefore, while the Wehrmacht feared the American military as an invincible, terrifyingly destructive adversary on the battlefield, they simultaneously viewed the Americans as their ultimate salvation. In the final months of the Third Reich, entire German armies would turn their backs on the advancing Soviets, fighting with fanatical desperation not to defeat the Western Allies, but to retreat fast, enough to surrender to an American or British officer. The Americans won the psychological war, not just because they possessed the shells to blow the Wehrmacht to pieces, but because they possessed the humanity that gave a defeated enemy a reason to stop fighting.